am Jackie J, and I am an associate professor in history, and this is my first year in the role as co-chair of the Academic Planning and Assessment Committee, that long acronym there, along with Tanley Wasson, who is in institutional effectiveness. And just to get a sense of where everybody is, we're a smaller crowd than some of my workshops in the fall. So if we could go around, and if you could just say your name, what program you're affiliated with, and what role you have. Do you write these reports, or do you contribute to them? That would be really helpful. Would you mind starting?
I'm Stephanie Adams, and I'm the Social Work Program Director.
And I'm Lori Wilson. I'm the Forensic Science Program Director, and I do write the reports.
Okay. My name is Wei Ning Chong. I'm the interim chair for Management Marketing International Business.
I'm Stephanie Wilson. I'm the Assessment Coordinator for the Department of Psychology.
Paul Palucci, I'm chair of anthropology, sociology, social work.
Joe Gershenson, government and economics, and teach the political science capstone course in which we do the assessment.
Yeah.
And I'm Ann Sismer, also from the Department of Government Economics, and I'm now teaching as well with Joe the course in which we'll be doing this.
Yeah, so you guys are figuring out, I understand from Lynette, how exactly you want to approach this.
Michelle Brown, I'm the coordinator of the special ed graduate program stuff, and then undergraduate deaf and hard hearing program, so I've got some variety of responsibilities.
In multiple places. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Same with you.
Chair of the Department of Special Education, and I wrote reports too.
I'm Cindy Fraser. I'm the Associate Degree Nursing program, and I am on the Program Outcomes Long-Term Planning Committee. So we work with
Yes.
with stuff.
I'm Beth Underwood, Sociology Program Coordinator, and hopefully figuring out who else will write these reports in the Sociology Program besides me. That's my goal.
Good luck.
My name's Tim Wiggins. I'm in the music department, and I think I will be writing some of this.
Okay.
Likely,
So,
since we're here,
yes.
we'll be writing it, yes.
So everybody at least knows what they're getting into when they walk into this room. I had a colleague of mine in the fall who very kindly said, I signed up for your workshop. I'm going to learn about metacognitive strategies. And I said, no, you're not. I think you need a different workshop. So we sent him over to one of Lisa and Jill's. And I will let Lisa and Jill introduce themselves. I'm sure you guys all know them.
Definitely,
but-
Department of English and QEP co-director, along with Dr. Jill Barrett.
Yeah, and so they are here to field any questions, and they will be working alongside. We have a QEP assessment team that involves Tanley, Bethany Miller, Megan in institutional effectiveness, Rose Perrine, and so part of what we do with the QEP, that's something that we presented to SACS. This is what our QEP is going to be, and part of our plan involved an assessment plan. And so now we're in the process of figuring out how are we going to fulfill what we said to SACS we're going to do. So when we write the next report, we can say, yes, check the boxes. And so the good news I will start with, for those of you who were involved in last spring's crazy scramble to update the reports and shift from future meaningful change to past meaningful change, I had indicated in my workshops in the fall that all signs were positive. We had gotten informal feedback that we were okay, and in December the official news came down. So we are good to go for the next 5 years. No monitoring reports, no interim, this is how we're trying to get better. We're good. So thank you all so much for everything you did. I came in June when Jennifer discovered that she wasn't going to be in this role anymore. I was part of that transition, and I prepared some of the material that went up to SACS as our response, and so I saw everything that you guys did last spring to come in and try to rewrite those reports that you thought were already finished and done with for the year, and it really is very appreciated. So our job now, moving forward, is to keep up that momentum and to try to figure out how do we integrate the QEP into our program level assessment. And as it was unveiled last February, Read with Purpose, the goal of the QEP is to develop critical readers through the use of metacognitive strategies. And the first of your handout package is the critical reading rubric. So this is what has been developed for the purpose of program level assessment. And the rubric itself, the Word document and some other resources are available at the website. And all of this material is going to be available. Typically what the Noel Studio does is they take that link that you first used on the TLI website to register, they then upload all of this documentation. And so you can go back and revisit this PowerPoint and use that link as needed. Or if you just type in Google search EKU QEP, it pops out. So this is our basis for what we're going to be doing. And today we're looking at program level assessment, but while I have you as a captive audience, I wanted to give you a sense of the timeline for Gen Ed. And Erin Presley will be doing a few workshops this semester focused on integrating Gen Ed assessment with the QEP. And for those of you who are part of 3A, 3B, and 5A, we are already in the midst of this. And Joe and I were part of the workshop in the spring to merge those rubrics. And for us, we found in 5A, historical perspectives, that it was a pretty easy job to merge those rubrics for us, thankfully. And so we didn't have to change that much from what we have been doing. We tweaked the vocabulary a little bit. 3A and 3B, they approached it as well. And so those merged rubrics are now available on the Gen Ed website. And they're basically taking the old rubric for the Gen Eds and taking this vocabulary and putting the two together. And moving forward, for those of you who are in other areas of Gen Ed, our goal is to bring you together to merge those rubrics next year, 2019, and then start piloting those assessment vehicles for the following Gen Ed cycle. So this is a Gen Ed report year. Gen Ed reports are due at the end of this spring. We have, I believe the first year writing programs are going to be presenting data for the QEP, but no other Gen Eds need to worry about the QEP for this set of reports. And then the next set of reports, we're going to be looking at 3A, 3B, and 5A. So watch for Erin's material coming out later in the spring. I think her first workshop is probably in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks. Now, getting to the program level expectations, here is a long paragraph, and we are in the committee. We've been working on assessing and providing feedback on the reports that you all produced in the fall, the 2017 reports. We've had our work days. We have feedback letters that are in the process of being prepared. And this paragraph is inserted into the feedback letters for every program. So when you get your feedback letters, we have incorporated the expectations moving forward. And this is one of the expectations moving forward. So this will be familiar vocabulary when you get your feedback letters, hopefully within the next month or so. So there is now a critical reading tag in TrackDat. So as you have your objectives, and you're using that little drop-down menu to mark your objectives, you can tag critical reading the same way you used to be able to tag critical thinking, communication, these big outcomes that you're tagging different objectives. And so beginning in 2018, so the reports you're going to be writing in the fall, we're wanting to see all programs linking at least one of their existing objectives. So you can take an objective that you already have. You might already be assessing critical reading, or you might be able to integrate critical reading into that assessment vehicle, or you can create a new critical reading objective entirely with its own assessment vehicle. So there are different ways of approaching this. But you need to have that tag linked to something in your program level report starting in the fall. And we want you to continue to have an objective addressing critical thinking and one for communication. So the QEP, critical thinking, we may have phased that out and moved into a new QEP, but we kind of still want our students to be critically thinking and to have that vocabulary in there. So we're adding the critical reading to the package.
And clarify something for me.
Yes.
Other Gen Ed elements outside of 3A, 3B, 5A
Yes.
are going to be run through the cycle next spring.
So it's just, so at this point, this was just to give you a sense of Gen Ed, and so right now, it's only 3A, 3B, and 5A.
Right.
So it's next spring
Right.
that we're even starting the process and merging the rubrics. So it's the following academic year, fall 2019, fall 2020, that you're gonna be starting to work with those to develop the vehicles. So you're not
This
even
is
assessing
program,
it.
this is program
Yeah.
level, so like our
Yeah.
senior seminar.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you said though, the tag for critical reading will be added this coming fall.
To the program level. So for your program level reports, the gen ed, not to confuse the issue, I just wanted to let everybody know because there are two separate things and two separate reports, right? So what we are addressing today is the program level that is completely separate from gen
Okay.
ed.
I understand.
And so what we're looking for are the program level objectives within the sociology report, the anthropology report, the political science, so those programs.
Are we
So
expected
probably
to have data yet, or
no,
just our assessment?
no, just your
the
assessment
link?
developed, yeah, yeah, it would be pretty premature to
To have
expect
data,
you to
right,
have
okay,
data.
that was my
But you need,
assumption,
yeah,
right.
but you need to have developed
Have it
that,
into the rubric.
set
the
first
objective.
you need an objective,
Right.
and then decide how you're gonna assess that objective, and then moving forward, you'll start having data. And then in 3 or 4 years, you will probably have meaningful change to, meaningful change to
Hopefully,
report on that.
hopefully, so meaningful
Hopefully.
So we don't
Yeah.
have to pilot a program level assessment this semester.
No,
We just have to develop
Develop an
our
objective.
yeah, exactly.
objective and the assessment that we will
Yeah.
use.
Yeah, and so as we are developing our rubrics for the reports in the fall, essentially we will be looking for, have you done something with critical reading? Is that on your radar? Have you started that process of developing some kind of program level assessment for that? And you can merge those together, so you can have a single objective that addresses critical reading, critical thinking, and communication. That's a pretty logical package. Okay, so that's the broad scale. Everybody good so far? Okay. So now if we move to a few specific examples, there are, as I've said, a variety of different ways of approaching this. And I'm starting with psychology because they were early adopters. And at this point, Stefan has developed a really robust way of integrating, I would say, I looked at it over the last few days and I was impressed, so no grimacing necessary. And if you take a look at their reporting unit 4 columns, what they have decided to do is to integrate a new objective. So they have developed a completely new objective for critical reading. So critical reading for independent learning, students will demonstrate critical reading skills through the use of metacognitive strategies. So that is a new objective that, when did you guys put this in? Not, it's in a second
Yeah,
reporting cycle.
Yeah, I
so a
piloted
couple
it
of years
last
ago.
spring.
Yeah.
I put it in, last spring.
Yeah, and so you collected data on it last year. So
Last spring.
Last spring, yeah. So you guys already have data to connect to that.
Mhm.
So there is a new critical reading objective that they have introduced, and a few different ways of assessing that within the program. So where they started was down here with the critical reading senior assessment in psychology 499. And that's what you have as the example on this page, the questions. And 499 is an online course, no credits associated with it, but to graduate, you have to have completed a series of exercises that you use for program level assessment. So it's all administered online. So this is something that is an exercise that they do as part of this online class. And so they've got 2 very short excerpts. So here's one of the excerpts that they're given. They have to read this section, and then they have to answer in an online format these 4 questions. And each one of these 4 questions is connected to one of the lines on the rubric. So it's a pretty straightforward, clear assessment vehicle, I think. And if you look at their explanation of it, all of our graduating seniors complete a senior exit course. This is a Blackboard course that contains the senior exit survey and 2 learning assessments. One of the learning assessments is critical reading. They can select one of 2 short texts. So these are one of the 2 short texts. They read the text, then they answer 4 questions on the text that correspond to comprehension, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And then if you jump down to the bottom, what they're looking for, their criterion, is that at least 80% of graduating seniors enrolled in Psych 499 will be classified as competent or better. So according to the rubric, competent or accomplished. And then you already have the results from the first year that you did this, and then you tweaked the wording as a result of that. So this is embedded into a senior required capstone assessment vehicle, and that allows you to assess the graduating seniors. So after they've gone through their entire program, are they meeting the benchmark that you would like them to meet?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
As at least 80% classified as competent or better on all of the competencies, or?
Yeah, it should be, I think, all of the competencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And none of them met that, so these are our baseline data.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and interestingly, and this, as your data develops, we would expect them to do better on the lower order. And so comprehension is 66%, analysis is 72%. And the numbers are all sort of in the same ballpark, but it was interesting to me that analysis was slightly higher than comprehension.
Can I
yes.
tell you how we graded these? Because it was really easy and it worked really well.
Yeah.
On assurance of learning, because it's all on a Blackboard site, I assigned each member of my department 10 to grade, and then I sent them to their offices to grade on the Blackboard site, and then they put it into a Google Doc. And so it took about an hour, and so then before we all came back together, I was able to calculate the means and the percentages.
Yeah, and so
from
then
my
you could
office.
discuss it.
And then we could discuss
on
it. It was
assurance of learning.
really
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
And easy.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting to see how those numbers evolve.
Mhm.
And so here.
So did you
yes.
have a copy in Word the students had submitted and the professor could load up the Blackboard? And then-
No, it's all done in Blackboard, and I had the rubric. I used the rubric feature in Blackboard, and so they
So
can
you had students go
click,
on the Blackboard
and they type it in
Gotcha.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, so using the grade center in
Mhm,
Blackboard,
yeah.
essentially, yeah. And so this then gives you a baseline for your current graduating population. And so moving down into the program, your hope is to then have individualized critical reading assignments in every psychology class that the individual professors develop. So they will be required to have a critical reading assignment and a focus, but you're not gonna collect data on that.
They can, if they want to in the individual data,
Yeah.
they can submit that, but no, that won't be.
Yeah, so across the board, and at first I thought you were gonna be collecting data for every single class, and I was like, oh my
No.
gosh. And then you said no, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense, that's doable, but it is at least, that focus is there, and so you can hopefully see over the next few years, as that focus is implemented in the lower level classes, what then happens to the numbers with the graduating seniors. And what I thought was really neat, this is the piece of the puzzle that you were just referring to, and this is the first assessment device there, course data assessments. And what you've developed, if I understand it correctly, is that at the beginning of a year, each professor decides from the psychology student learning outcomes, I'm going to focus on this particular psychology learning outcome for my own assessment purposes. So they'll develop an assignment focused on perhaps critical reading. They'll give it, they'll look at the results. If they didn't get the results they wanted, then they'll tweak. They'll tweak their instructional system, they'll tweak the assignment, and then that becomes your meaningful change that is completed in the meaningful change column, because each professor has to choose one outcome for assessment, and critical reading could be one of those. And so here you can see course data assessments are classroom assignments from undergrad psychology courses that individual faculty have classified as assessing critical reading. So it's all grassroots. This is not mandated. The individual professor decides. And so then they classify student performance as meeting, exceeding, or not meeting expectations. then they tweak their assignments as a result. So 7 of your faculty chose last year to focus on critical reading, and then you've got the tweaks that they made as a result of their own assessment. So I thought that was really neat in a way to engage faculty with specific learning outcomes without requiring them to assess and deal with everything every year. You can choose as an individual faculty member where you want to place your focus based on your individual course. So that, I thought, I was impressed when I saw that. Yeah. Anything you want to add or any questions? Yeah, Lisa.
This is great stuff. Were your faculty surprised at the results of the 57%? Were competent or higher on synthesis, or 62 on integration, 66 on comprehension?
They were, and they're always very frustrated by those types of results, and so we revised the assessment, but yes, they were, and they were frustrated by it. And it's unusual, although I guess it was just 7 faculty, and not everyone is assessing critical reading, but the class assessment results are higher, yeah.
Yeah, because
That's
I
a
think
little-
because the instructors are placing that focus, and
Mhm.
so
Right.
as opposed to this
Right.
generic at the end of the program, how well have you absorbed these skills?
Right.
And that issue of transferability, we all know, can be an issue.
I have a
Yeah.
question on the history document.
Yes.
And
History is where we are going next.
Oh.
And so does anybody have any other questions or comments about psychology before we move to history? And then I can explain what we have done. Everybody good? All right. So then in psychology, they developed a completely new objective for critical reading. In history, we really felt that this was something that we already did, and so we looked at our existing assessment vehicles to see, do we need to tweak? How can we integrate critical reading into what we are doing in an overt way, given that we think that should be there somewhere? And if you take a look at the history 4 column, so skip this first part. Most of our virtually all of our program level assessment occurs in the context of a sequence of research paper classes. Within the major, they have to take 4 classes that focus on the skills of writing a research paper. Introductory research and methods, which we are assessing for baseline data, but not for our objective reports. Then they do 2 intermediary classes, 302s, that have 10 to 12 page research papers, and then their BA capstone, the 450, which is their thesis, and that's 15 to 20 pages. So it's a very scaffolded system. And our program level assessment is embedded within the papers that they produce as a result of these research classes. So here's our research project. Students completing the baccalaureate history and history teaching degree programs will be able to execute a research project utilizing both primary and secondary sources at a level acceptable to a jury of faculty. And this is, as of last year's report, the 2017 report, we had tagged this as communication and critical thinking. And if you see here, survey of undergraduate degree candidates, 80% of all graduating seniors will respond, strongly agree or agree to the statement, they taught me how to do history research. And there's been a lot of emphasis on the distinction between direct and indirect methods and what students think about their abilities not being as strong as direct methods. And so if you read the text here, the department unanimously decided to eliminate the survey of undergraduate candidates. And there is a place for indirect methods, but for this particular objective, it really was not a good vehicle for assessing how well they could conduct research, if they thought they could conduct research well. So we've really placed the emphasis, if you flip the page, on the papers themselves. And the criterion, all history majors complete a formal capstone research project which includes both primary and secondary sources as part of their major requirements. So this is the 450. We have a similar section of the report for the 302 papers. 75% will meet the following standards: inclusion of a clearly written and viable thesis, provision of a narrative supporting the thesis with evidence, placement of the thesis in a broader historical context, use of primary sources, integration of primary and secondary material, and the use of full sentences within well-structured paragraphs, and then footnotes and endnotes and bibliographies. And that's where we leave that in every year, and every year they do not meet our expectations for bibliographies and footnotes, but it's such a critical thing that if you look at our meaningful change, every year we develop a new way to try to get them to meet those citation exercises. So these are our check seats, initial bibliographies. Our meaningful change was new ways to try to figure out how to drill that into their heads. And I have edited academic journals, and senior scholars are really, really bad at footnote citations. So I completely understand where our students have that struggle. So this set of requirements was something that has been in place in the history department for these term papers for a really long time. And so I took a look at this vocabulary and thought, if we go back to the critical reading rubric, is there somewhere here that we can link our assessment of these papers to critical reading? And I found synthesis accurately, deeply, and broadly connects and integrates relevant and significant concepts from text to construct and support explanations, conclusions, or arguments. Back to my report, the integration of primary and secondary material. So I think it's something we already do, and I thought, nice. I don't think we need to do anything different. And here is how we assess that. We have an assessment committee, which is, as you can imagine, the most popular committee for faculty to sit on. And we evaluate the gen ed papers and the 302 and 450 papers. And this is the grid that's used to evaluate the 450 and 302 papers. Satisfactory, unsatisfactory. Each faculty member gets a stack of their papers. They are anonymized and given numbers, so they put the numbers in the top, and they usually do 2. Faculty member look at each paper. And so then the committee chair has to determine if one says S, one says U, which the committee chair is the tiebreaker. And so we've got the expectations here, and here's the integration of primary and secondary material. And admittedly, it is only one element of the critical reading rubric, synthesis, but it's a higher order element. And our hope is that by doing this, at least next year, we can then look at those numbers and see how well are they doing with integration. If they are really falling down on integration, then where do we need to start backtracking and maybe start assessing comprehension a little bit more overtly at the program level, or incorporating meaningful changes earlier in the program to really work on that element of synthesis and integration.
So for this objective,
Yeah.
we can use just one element of this critical thing. So like, we don't, in our program, because we have a writing intensive course too,
Right.
that is the exact same thing.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
can use that paper and fulfill my critical reading objective. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yes. And that was essentially what I presented this to Lisa and Jill in the fall with history and said, okay, here's what we were doing. Do you think this satisfies the requirement? And SACS is not, they are heavy-handed, but they are not completely unreasonable. And this is a pretty good faith effort to incorporate critical reading into your assessments. Yeah.
And so my question, maybe a follow-up, or maybe I just didn't understand. So of these 4 indicators, you chose synthesis. Is
Right.
there a required number of those things? Are you supposed to hit all of them? You just have to select one. So if I just
Select-
wanted
yeah.
to, you wouldn't wanna do comprehension probably.
Yeah, exactly. I would
But-
say select a higher order one,
Right.
but yes, yeah.
Okay.
And if there's a good rationale for why you are selecting it and how that ties in because the elements of the rubric are interconnected. And so you can develop a vehicle and see, does that really capture what you need to know about your students? And then you can start tweaking. But especially as an initial step, I think starting with one higher order element.
And you really can't get to synthesis unless you have
Yeah.
comprehension, so I mean, it's.
Exactly,
so I just
exactly.
wanted to
Especially at the
clear.
program level, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you said individual classes, are you encouraging individual, classes to really pay attention to like maybe the comprehension level or one of these other levels? I kind of missed what you said about like some of the instructors just doing specific ones in
Yeah,
their
so that
courses.
was what they have done in psychology, and so within psychology for assessment, each instructor at the beginning of the year chooses one particular outcome from the list of psychology outcomes for assessment focus. And that's not a mandatory way of
Okay,
doing things,
okay.
it's just an example of how they've done it that I think is a good way of getting faculty involved and thinking about their student learning outcomes, and then gives you some really fabulous examples of completed meaningful change with tweaked assignments at the end of the day.
But we do need to overtly and specifically link our evaluation to this rubric.
In some way.
Okay.
In some way, yes. So when you can't just take what you already have and click on the link critical reading without having looked at the critical reading rubric and be able to say in your analysis of results, these results show that our students are or are not meeting our expectations with respect to critical reading. Yes.
And I'm going to add too that I think we really want to encourage everyone to consider not just how we can meet this or what we can check off in track data or however it's being reported, but to encourage faculty to come to our sessions or work with us so that we can come to your departments to work with you so that there is actual meaningful change in the way that instructors are relating to the students and the pedagogical practices for critical reading in the classes. So all of it's connected, right? Like we don't want it to just be, oh, look, we already do this and look, it connects to the rubric, done, right? Like we really want you to be having conversations about it and getting faculty involved in the meaningful change part.
Yeah, and so for us in history, we said this is great, we don't need to change our assessment vehicles, but when we look at the data, we look at the data through the lens of critical reading. And that then enables us to determine what do we need to change, what meaningful changes do we need to make based on that lens of critical reading, analyzing the data we already have. Yeah, Lisa?
I would like to add too that, I mean, I think it's been 4 or 5 years ago that I can't remember who else worked with your faculty on critical reading. Like the history department said, we want to be better at helping our students become better critical readers because they were so frustrated at that students weren't reading the way that they wanted them to.
Oh, that's right, because we went to
And so
Jennifer's,
you all-
you and
yes.
Jennifer developed that
Yes.
workshop, and I came, and that was my first introduction to metacognitive
Yeah.
reading strategies.
And so your
yeah.
department's been working on critical reading very deliberately, I would say, for maybe 4 years.
Mhm. And so we want, this is my goal as both faculty and now with this assessment piece to an administration is, since this is something that we do have to do, we don't want to do it, it takes time regardless. And so we might as well develop assessment vehicles that are going to be useful for us and actually going to tell us valid information about what we need to change instead of, and this is what we often see in the reports is, here are our goals, we met all of our goals, we're good, we're done. And with these program level reports, we really want you to be setting goals that are maybe a little higher than what you think your students can achieve so that you can see where you need to change things. Because if you're meeting your goals across the line and SACS is looking for the use of results for meaningful change, you don't have results that are prompting that meaningful change. So look at your benchmarks, and you don't want to say, we'll set them so low that every single one of our students can easily jump over them.
You put us in a really tight place with our accreditation,
Yes.
program accreditation doing that.
Yes, and
because if we're not
Yeah,
meeting our student learning
exactly.
outcomes,
Yeah.
then.
Yeah. And I've had this conversation with a number of people, and I think there are ways to work it both ways and to say, maybe there are a few objectives that are not linked to, specifically to accreditation, for those of you who have accreditation bodies. They're all, yeah. And so then,
We have either student
Yeah.
learning outcomes or they're not.
yeah, and so I would say, I would use the even though wording. So even though we met all of our
So-
goals, faculty recognized that we weren't
Okay.
instructing as effectively as we could in critical
So
reading.
we're not necessarily in trouble if we meet our goals, we just do need to continue to make change.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
We
Yeah.
had this same
Yeah.
problem because we have to,
Yeah.
all of our students have to reach their goals or else they can't graduate. So we had to be creative in
Well,
how we did our
even if
meaningful
you look
change.
at, all your students, and, some don't graduate perhaps, but still, by the time we get to our fourth semester, which is where we, where we need to, for accreditation, evaluate end of program, student
Right.
learning
Yeah.
outcomes.
And
Most
certainly,
of the students who get to the fourth semester graduate, almost, it's about 99%, so.
yeah, and if I'm looking at the nursing profession and I'm going to a hospital, I want my nurses to have met their accreditation standards. And so it's that sort of walking the fine line between your accreditation body and what SACS wants to see, which is that you are seeking evidence of improvement based on results. So can you use that accreditation data and put a more fine-tooth comb through it to pull out something that, even though we're meeting our accreditation requirements, we still saw room for improvement here, and we made those changes because of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we could also potentially do a way station, if you will. Assessment,
exactly.
and say, okay,
Yeah.
well, they're where they need to be at the end, but we could help them get there a little bit more smoothly.
Yeah,
in their
and just
program.
knowing that SACS is really looking for that meaningful change based on the use of results. How, they're not explicit about how you do that, they just wanna see that when you say, here are the changes we made, there's some explanation of why, and that those are based on your data in some way.
My program is pretty small, the deaf and hard hearing program, and so what I've, and you're right, like for my own accreditation for the Council on Education of Deaf, but also for CAPE and all of that, they have to meet a certain level, but what I since we use task stream for some of our assessments, I tended to think the way I got the most information is when I went in and I looked at like how close, what did they do on their first submission, and how long did it take me to get to them to that acceptable level, because we work with them, you give them feedback and they resubmit and they do all of that, so that's kind of what that's the way I target it is sort of like time to competency, not just, are they there already? So then if it takes them longer to get there, it's like, well, what can I build up in the course to begin with to give them more support so that they get there more easily, and it's less work for me, am I really having to pull them along, or are they what level are they when they begin and how do they get there? So that's kind of the way I've been.
Yeah, and maybe
Well,
targeting some of your assessment, instead of so much of it is tied to capstones where you do expect them to have achieved all of this, and there's a problem if they haven't, maybe developing some of your assessment at the lower level where you can, these are benchmarks, so this is an important introductory class. Have we taught them what they need to do to move forward?
I have a question, you might address this at some point, but one thing that's popping in my head. We have two things here then, right? We have the critical reading and metacognitive strategies.
Right.
So it looks like the assessment area is located in the results of the critical reading assignment.
Yeah.
And then it also assumes at some point there are use of metacognitive strategies in the teaching and the instruction, whatever else.
Yeah, and
Now,
that's,
is the assumption that one is connected to the other? Or are we gonna have to demonstrate how does this particular set of metacognitive strategies directly address and connect what we're evaluating here? And I'll just give you an example that popped in my head.
yeah.
Let's say somebody has a terrible driving record, and then we tell them, read the driving manual, right? Well, maybe it was their more actual practice driving that improves their driving record, and it has nothing to do with reading the driving manual. but if we don't measure, I mean, how are,
Yes.
or is there gonna be a requirement that we show how they're connected, or we just show that we're doing these things?
That's really excellent, and I think if we work through my next example, and then I'm gonna get to this is just one of the SLOs of the QEP, are the direct measures, and students are showing critical reading ability, because then there is a separate piece of the puzzle that deals with the metacognitive strategies. And so at the program level, that is just too much to both be able to say, yes, they can critically read, and they can do it because we use these strategies. So we have different ways of assessing that. So the third example I wanted to share with you is Cindy Hayden in occupational therapy, and they did a PLC that was focused on occupational therapy last spring, and some really incredible stuff has come out of this. And I've been talking with them over the past few weeks, and they haven't yet determined exactly how they're gonna approach the program-wide assessment. But Cindy has developed a completely separate from accreditation and TrackDat. This is her own research project that I think can be used as a basis for their program level assessment. And so what she's been doing is within a series of classes from junior, senior, undergraduate, master's year 1, master's year 2 in occupational therapy, what she's trying to assess through her research project is to show if students are given targeted instruction in metacognitive strategies, their ability to read a scholarly peer-reviewed article will get better. And so this is a research project that is tangentially tied to the QEP, but not at this point being used for program level assessment. And what she has done, this is the last piece. So here are her exercises. They've got both short answers and then multiple choice that they fill out. They're given a scholarly article, they read the scholarly article, and then she's developed a video tutorial. And so the video tutorial means that she shows this video and it gives consistency for her research data. So it's not her at the front of the class going through it every time, she shows the video. And as she shows the video, walking them through how to critically read a scholarly article with metacognitive strategies, they fill out this sheet of questions. List 2 things you would like to know about critically reading a scholarly article. Write down questions you have about the abstract. Write down questions you have about the introduction. And then they also have multiple choice that they have to answer. And these are not based on the content of the scholarly article. What formatting does this article follow? So they have to identify the formatting, but none of these questions are related to the content. So this is all metacognitive strategies. And what I've said to them is, this is an amazing exercise with the scholarly peer-reviewed article. You could probably take that, add some content questions, and tweak that to then become a program-level assessment. And so they do the metacognitive strategies, they answer the questions, and how Cindy is assessing their ability to critically read is through something called the Metacognitive Assessment of Reading Strategies Inventory, which is a big mouthful. They call it the MARCI for short. And that is what's on the back of your rubric. And so they do this as a post-test and as a pre-test and a post-test. So before they do the video tutorial and answer these questions, they go through and they answer questions like, I have a purpose in mind when I read. I take notes while reading to help me understand what I read. And they're rating themselves on this scale. And then after they've done the video tutorial, they do this again. And Cindy's assumption, the hypothesis that she's testing, is that the video tutorial will cause them to go up on the scale. They will think that their own metacognitive strategies have improved as a result of doing this exercise. And so this I wanted to present to you because it's really neat stuff that she's doing, and it combines the different levels of the QEP. So Paul's question was, do we need to explicitly tie metacognitive strategies to our program level assessment? And here's our 3 SLOs for the QEP. And this is the one that we're focused on right here. students will demonstrate critical reading of academic texts and materials. EKU critical reading rubric, direct measure, 85% at competent or accomplished. So going forward to SACS, this was what we had said our student learning outcome is. And so at the program level, that's what you guys are most concerned with. So in answer to your question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're expecting them to do both in the program level reports.
Well,
But,
also
yes.
the connection to the other piece is, as I said before, if
Faculty
faculty are coming to our
development.
workshops
Yeah.
and the PLCs, all of the training that we're doing is explicitly focused on metacognitive strategies.
Yeah.
So if you're interacting with us and taking that back to the classrooms, then our assumption is that
Yeah.
any improvement in students' critical reading that is coming out of that as a result of changes in pedagogical strategies will be metacognitive.
Yeah, so our hope.
But it's an
Yeah.
assumption, there's not
Right.
a direct demonstration how one's
Right.
connected to the other.
And so
It could be a
where
meaningful
the
change.
the
Yeah,
piece
right.
is, yes, that can be meaningful change. And where the piece is that university-wide, we're showing that connection, that we are both doing metacognitive strategies and critical reading, and the two are connected, is in these second two levels, where they take the Marcy coming in and they do it in English 101, yes. So every student is doing this, and this might be new to you, it was relatively new to me. So they come in, and in English 101, we have data from every student, how they feel about their metacognitive abilities. And then is it part of the graduating survey, or at the?
No, it's part of the development, all the developmental courses are doing it
Yeah.
as well, in English and reading.
Yeah.
And the first year writing
Yeah,
courses.
and then is there a post-test? Do they do it at the end of their program? Where do they do it at the end of their program?
At the end of the course.
At the end of the course, yeah. So at the end of their career here at EKU, so that's what I wasn't sure about. So they do this at the beginning,
Yes.
and then they do this at the end.
Is
They're-
it at the beginning of 101? It's kind of nice to know for
Yeah,
the
the beginning
students
and the
coming in.
end. Yeah, in the first
beginning
couple
of
of weeks
101.
and
So
then
they've
the last
seen
one.
this when they, pretty early in their.
Yeah, yeah, so they've seen it early in their time, and then at the end of their time here, there is a graduation survey that is a confidence scale in critical reading. I feel confident in my abilities to critically read. So for SACS, we have both direct and indirect measures. And so as you guys are developing your program level assessments to assess, are they meeting our critical reading expectations? If they're not, your meaningful change is, how do we incorporate the metacognitive strategies, professional development, exercises within class that are based on what faculty have learned through the professional development. And so even though you're not explicitly showing that connection in your reports and not being required to, that is a really good way to incorporate meaningful change. And the hope is that all of these pieces of the package will work together.
And Jackie, where did you say the third one is being assessed?
This is a graduation survey.
Graduation survey?
Yeah.
So
So
it's
this is-
sent out by
This
institutional
This is
research or
intro
something?
101, and this
Right.
is, so, and it's through EKU Direct, right? That they do this,
So when they apply for graduation or something, or?
something like that.
But these don't get
Yes.
reported back to departments, right? These are just for university-wide.
There is a QEP assessment report. Is that something that's available to faculty, or is that something that's just internal?
I don't want it to be
Well,
available.
yeah.
I wanted to know if
Required
at some
reading
point I
for
was gonna
you,
be
Beth.
responsible for it.
Yeah, I think the confidence scale is just
Deal.
very broad university-wide.
Yeah, but no,
It
so,
depends on the
so,
website.
so that I think hopefully fills in how the
Mhm,
different
mhm.
pieces are intended to relate within the assessment, how we have told SACS we're going to be assessing this. And so, even though you are not explicitly required to tie in metacognitive strategies into the reports and the assessment vehicles, it's supposed to be part of the package. These
When-
things go together.
All right, so with the assumption that one is influencing the other, even though there's not a direct way to demonstrate that,
Right.
that's the assumption. When there's a report on the metacognitive strategies being used, is there gonna be a requirement that this is connected to some sort of authoritative source? So for example, in one of your handouts, they
Mhm.
had this little note at the bottom where it came from, reference this inventory.
Oh, that's the Marcy, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, so it says, well, this is where we got this one from. On this one, I mean, I can see that there are metacognitive strategies built in there.
Right.
But
That
theoretically,
is-
we could just make up a list and say, these are our metacognitive strategies. Well, who are you, Dr. Palucci? You're not expert on metacognition. Connect it to tools that have been used and shown to work through research already. Go find a
Yeah.
source for that. Is that gonna be something that will?
I don't believe so. Lisa?
Well, I'd say we've done all that work for you.
Yes.
I mean, the
Yeah.
reason that the QEP SLO is students will demonstrate critical reading, well, the overall through metacognitive strategies is because there are like decades of research that say this is how you help students become better critical readers is by teaching them to be metacognitive. Because all of us as expert readers, even though we're not thinking about our thinking all the time, we're very metacognitive, and that's why we're all expert readers. So that work's already been done. I mean, I think the research base is clear and it's there. So-
Well, no, what I'm saying is that is SACS or something to come back and say,
SACS?
what you've linked here.
Where are your footnotes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what you've linked here,
And-
you're just saying this is a metacognitive
Them
strategy.
last February,
Yeah.
that has
And
it
it's
all.
on
Yeah.
our website.
Yeah, and
So
SACS
what we're teaching in our professional development workshops are all sort of research-based.
So we don't
They
need to
are
do
all
that.
research-based strategies that support the development of critical reading. So yeah, we've done that.
So the
Yes,
program
that's already
assessments won't need to document, I got this from this piece of the
You
PLC
can say our
regards, or I got
faculty
this
have
from
been
that.
promoting or have been using instructional strategies promoted through QEP
Mhm.
professional development.
Yeah.
Um,
And you can tie that to meaningful change. That would be, so we saw a problem in critical reading and X number of faculty went to professional development opportunities and incorporated these devices into their classes. And what I have
So
discovered.
without digital measures now, we can't collect that.
Ah. And what, yes, yeah, this is true. Professional development becomes, yeah, and.
We do keep track of everybody who
Yeah.
comes,
And
though,
that-
so we can manually go through if a department wants to know it
Yeah.
and find the name.
And that was what I was gonna say, is that I have discovered that SACS is heavy-handed to some degree. Their expectations are high, but it is the kind of thing where they only hold you accountable for what you said you would do. And so a reviewer is going to come back and say, when you initially proposed this QEP to us, this is how you said you were going to assess it. Are you doing what you said you were going to do? And so, because this is what we said we were going to do, if we can adequately prove to them that yes, we did it. And so part of what we said was, we would like to have faculty, X number of faculty involved in professional development activities. And so, as a result of that, we are tracking how many are coming so that we can then write the report and say, we said we would have these development activities available that X number of faculty would come to, and they did. And so, if you have come to the faculty development, if you are assessing critical reading at the program level, if you are making meaningful changes based on the data you see, the pieces of the puzzle really should fit together, I think. Yeah. All right, so, and as I say, this PowerPoint will be available, but as you're thinking about how to do this in your own individual program, here are a few questions that you might want to start with. So where does the bulk of your program's program level assessment take place? So for us, it's in the 302 and the 450 BA. Or do you want to set it at a lower level so that you can have that benchmark that doesn't affect your accreditation? What kind of critical reading assignment could you picture integrating into core program classes? Is there an existing program assignment assessment vehicle that could be linked to the QEP that you can then use as that lens to start assessing critical reading? So thinking about what you've already got, where you want to be, where you want your students to be, and how you and your individual programs think you can best achieve that. Because just as SACS only holds us accountable for what we said we were going to do, in institutional effectiveness, they're not gonna say one size fits all. This is how we believe everybody should be assessing program level assessment across the board. It would make your lives easier if we all had one assessment vehicle, but it's not gonna lead to real meaningful meaningful change that's useful to you. And so the onus is on you to figure out, how do you want to do this? How is this best going to lead to those improvements? Yeah, Lisa.
And I would just like to put in a plug for our professional
yes,
learning
yes,
community
yes.
that'll be starting probably in about 2 weeks. And as Cindy Hayden's great example shows, there are several faculty members who have participated in our workshops or PLCs who are interested in scholarship of teaching and learning. And so if that's something that you're interested in, there's lots of ways, I think, to turn doing this assessment into conference presentations or publishable articles. And so maybe participating in the PLC might be a good step in moving in that direction as well.
Yeah, thank you. I was meaning to plug your PLC. And then the other thing, here are your important dates. So October 12th for your educational programs, and your departments, if you are also responsible for department level reports, those are a separate deadline. In many departments, they like to do the programs and the departments together, but you don't have to. You do have a little bit of more time for those department level reports because they're focused on unit level goals, not student learning outcomes. So that is a little bit different. And I will put in a plug. I know everybody loves the idea of more university service, but we have about 20 people on the Academic Planning and Assessment Committee, and several of them are now in their 3rd year. And this has been, for them, really instructive. The idea is not just to provide feedback for other people, but by looking at reports that are produced across the university, you really do get better at reviewing or at producing your own reports. So you get to compare and see. And so we get together, we have long work days, but we feed you well. It's the kind of committee that has short bursts of intensive activity and then long periods of nothing. And so university level service, this would be a very productive way, I think, to use your time to see what other people are doing and then provide feedback to them in that way, improving your own reports. So if that's something you would be interested in, we always get such a wave of recruits for that, but it is, it's instructive. So thank you guys very, very much.